Hey, what's going on, guys? How's everybody doing? I wanted to start the conversation with what you guys think of the importance of GitHub profiles and GitHub presence. See, at first I was under the impression that as a self-taught developer, the only way you were going to be able to get a job was to have some kind of, trackable presence online of the projects that you've worked on. But I've talked to a lot of the professional developers, and some of them are personal friends, and some have even worked for, FANG-level enterprise companies. And while I still think having a GitHub presence is important because it shows that you care enough and have passion for coding enough to have your own projects and maybe possibly work on open source projects, but it also shows at least some level of competency with Git as a tool. The thing is, hiring managers and prospective employers are never going to stand up your toy projects while they have hundreds and hundreds of applications coming in every day. But I would venture to say most of them will at least probably at some point look at minimum your profile, either initially when you apply, or if not, maybe in the first round of interviews or something like that. And we've all been taught the same, don't judge a book by its cover, but I bet you are getting judged pretty hard just on that one thing, just that one profile. And they probably only spend about 10 seconds looking at it. And then they're going to judge you, based on that information. And actually, for that reason, I built a tool that will automatically aggregate, analyze, and produce some data visualizations and represent you as a developer based on the data of your own work output. It mostly focuses on Python projects for you gathering the data. And in this video, I'm going to walk you through the data gathering and structuring. And then we're going to construct 2 of the visualizations in the form of plotly charts, because there's really no reason to go through 8 different kinds of charts when they're basically all kind of the same. And you'll be able to customize those to your heart's extent. But for those of you that don't want to continue pursuing the creation of this tool on your own, I also have an open source and free tool on GitHub. And in order to run this tool, that GitHub action script actually enables a run workflow button in your actions tab. And then it just becomes a one-click process to update all of the data and the data visualizations on your profile. The cool thing about that tool is that it runs entirely on GitHub servers. So all of the data visualization, the data scraping, the gathering, all of that stuff will happen on GitHub servers. You don't even have to worry about running it locally at all. And the creation of the visualizations and the stitching of the GIF and the updating of the actual profile content itself, it all happens on GitHub servers. So if you're interested in using that tool or interested in creating a tool of your own that's very similar, this would be a really good place to start. Because once you kind of get the basics down here, it becomes 100% hands-off, save for that one click that you have to do in your profile repo to run the workflow. So with all that said, let's go ahead and get started. And as usual, all of the code and a written version of this guide is available on my website here. This link will be in the description, and you can just go through step by step, which is exactly what we're doing in this video. If you need a written description, this is all here, and then you can expand these out and copy and paste the code here. Copy and paste button here, expand and collapse. I provided a setup script here, which is the very first step in the written guide. So if we copy that and we put it in project setup.py in our root directory here, we've created this file, brand new directory, paste that code in, and that'll just set up our actual project structure. And then we'll activate the virtual environment. So we'll do that venv scripts activate. Sorry about my terminal here. It looks a little weird, but this will run. And we activated our virtual environment. And the next thing that we want to do is run that project setup script. So Python project setup, we'll run that. You'll see this created these files and these directories, and obviously you'll see that reflected in your project directory. And if you look at the env file that was generated, we have the key environment variable itself filled out. You're going to have to get your own GitHub API key. And if you go to the written guide, there is a link to the profile generator. And if you actually go to that tool, and I'll link this in the description as well, you can go to the very first step under instructions, and this will tell you exactly how to get the GitHub API key. You can populate it here in your environment file. And once you have the environment variable filled out, you can go to your config and go ahead and fill these out. And an example config file is in the written guide. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste that here. You can see that we basically need to, the important ones, we need to fill out GitHub username for your own username. And if you have any repos you'd like to specifically exclude from our data, list them under ignored repos. You can also change the PyTZ expected time zone entry. So if you're unfamiliar, like most of your typical time zones as strings will work like this here. But you can also, if you need to figure out if you're in like a different time zone and you're not sure exactly what it is that you can run a script like this, which will just print the common time zones that are available to choose from. So for the typical US time zones, these are what they are here. So hopefully you're in one of those. And if not, you can just go ahead and take a look at the docs here, or just run this on your own and go ahead and get what your time zone is. So we also need to install all of our dependencies that were populated in the requirements.txt that we generated. And if we go ahead and do that, we can install -r requirements.txt. All right, and so the first thing we're going to do is in the utils directory, we're going to start with config helper.py, which is here. And we're essentially going to create a helper function that looks for a config file path. And if it isn't set as an environment variable, then it'll default to config.ini in the root directory. And then we'll essentially use config parser to read the ini file and expose the loaded configuration object as a config, so the rest of the code can access the settings from it. So if we import os config parser, and then we'll do a load config, and we'll config path will be that with the default of config.ini. And if we'll do the actual config itself with the config parser object. And if we are not reading a config path, then we will raise the file not found error. And otherwise, we will return the actual config object itself. And then at the end of the file, we'll config equals load config. And that's all that is for the config helper. Moving on, we will go to datascrape.py, and we have these imports here to start, and then we are going to load.env, and then we'll start populating our constant variables here. So debug, that fallback equals false, correct, and then step count, it will be under debug with step count. If we go ahead and look at our config, you'll see debug and step count here. Then we will get our access token from our environment variable, and our user will be from the config. Time zone will be also from settings. Yep, target time zone with, I just have this as a fallback for myself. And then we will do a lowercase target time zone is going to be of the PyTZ time zone type, but that will be PyTZ time zone with the parameter of time zone here. And then we are going to populate a set of ignored repos. So we'll do ignored repo. Let's do ignored actually. Will be equal to r.strip for r and config.get settings, ignored repos. Yep. No fallback, and we'll split on the comma here because we have these. Well, I only have one here, but this could be a comma separated config input here. And then we need to also do our excluded durs. Yep. And it'll be strip. Yep. And excluded durs d.split or strip. And we'll close that, and our output path. Path we equal to this string repo json.data. We're going to retrieve all the .py files in a repositories default branch. We're going to filter for some blobs ending in py and download the file contents from GitHub. We'll decode the base64 encoded data to UTF-8, and then we will work on wrangling around the commit times over the commits in the repository to extract the actual date and convert it to UTC. So here we will list our py files. So tree will be equal to repo.get tree, repo default branch, recursive is true. And then we'll just do this list comprehension here as in the return statement. I dot path, I dot SHA. This is incorrect. Path is excluded, and this actually needs to get passed in here. And path is excluded I.path. And in order to implement that function there, we're going to write path is excluded. We'll do norm path will be equal to path.replace, and then we're going to replace those double slashes with a single forward slash. We're going to replace the double backslash with a single /. We'll fix that, get rid of this, and then we will get the parts of the path will be equal to norm paths, and we'll split on that delimiter that we just changed, the directory delimiter. And then we will return any of the part plus the delimiter for the directory that is in excluded dirs for parts, and then this will remove that trailing /. All right. And then we are going to want to create a function fetch text, and that will take a repo, of type repository, and a SHA, which is a string, and it will return a string. And then we are going to blob base 64 is going to be equal to repo.get get blob with the SHA as the parameter and the content of that. Yeah, so that's correct. And then we will return base 64 decoded of the base 64 blob decoded to UTF-8, and we will errors equals ignore. And next, we're going to implement a function that will transpose the commit times as they came from GitHub to our local time, so they're accurate for when we were actually making these commits. So we'll do times will be equal to, an empty list for now will be a list of ints. And then we are going to for commit and repo.get commit. A author will be equal to get attr c.commit author, otherwise none by default, and if a and a dot date, which should always be true, but we will do datetime local. It's going to be a dot date dot replace, and then tz info will be timezone dot utc, and we will do as timezone with our target timezone here. And then we need to append that to our times. Append, and that will have a list in it of datetime local dot weekday, and datetime local hour. That'll work. And then we are going to return times. Yep. And then we just need to work on the main function, which looks like this. We're going to return none, obviously. We're going to create a GitHub object with our access token. This isn't strictly necessary, but it just paginates the returns. Then it'll get our user from that object with our config from the user. Then we'll initialize a dictionary here. For now, it'll just be one value or one key repo stats with the empty list as a value. Then we are going to iterate through all of our repos. So for I repo and enumerate user get repos, we will if debug, and if I is greater than step count, we're going to print that we are stopping after however many step counts we have in our config, and that will be like this. And then we will break because we're just doing our debug testing. Otherwise, if just debug and we are less than step count, then we are going to print that we are in debug mode, and we're going to print the number of repositories we processed as well as the repo name. And if we are not in debug, we're just going to print that we are processing a repo and which number that we're on of total processed. And here we are going to do some skipping of specific repos. So actually we're going to do for forks, or if we're not, if us as a user is not equal to the user, well, if us as a user is not equal to the user of the owner of that repo. So we will just continue in that case. And we will check now for the profile repo if we're excluding that. So if not config dot get boolean, we're going to look in settings for the include profile repo, and with no fallback. So if we are not including the profile repo and the repo.name is us, which would be user.login, we are going to continue. And afterwards, we will also filter out explicitly ignored repos. So if repo name and ignored, we will continue the loop as well. Otherwise, we will do our processing. So from here, we will total lines is going to be 0, and total files are going to equal to 0. And then we are going to try, and we're going to do a for loop while tuple unpacking. So we don't need the first value. We just need the SHA. Enlist pyfiles with the repo as a parameter. The text is going to be equal to fetch repo, repo name, and the SHA. The total lines will get amended to do the text count by new lines. And when we are finished, we're going to add that is a Python file that we're tracking. And then we're going to accept, this is actually specifically GitHub exception. And then in that case, we'll just continue. You shouldn't run into this, but just in case. And then we will do times would be equal to commit times local repo, which is what we wrote here. And then we will need to add our repo stats to that data structure. So well, it's a dictionary currently, but data repo stats append, and we need to append an object, and that will be repo name. We need to repo name will be, repo.name, and total Python files will be equal to total files, total Python lines, total Python lines, and then commit times will be equal to times. And then, we will, with open in our output path from our config, or no, actually, I think we set this up here, yeah. Output path from there, we'll write that as UTF-8, and we'll write as JSON, and then we will print that we are all done. Lastly, we'll have to just do an if name equals main check here, and if we are, we need to run main. And if we go ahead and run this as a module here, we will, this is utils.data scrape. We got our first error running this as a module here to check our output. So we've got line 59. We got here, this is user, user name. Just got a typo here. Yeah, config, try again. And, or sorry, this needs to be c.commit because we're getting the commit. Let's try this again. And we're processing, should stop here when it finishes processing this one. And data save to repo.json, and that looks like this. So we've got the repo stats, we've got a repo name. This one doesn't have any Python files or Python lines. There is this one. And then, so our first one here, AIODISA, has 10 Python files and 307 Python lines, and these are when we committed, the hour and the date.